Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Spooky Scary Saturday. You are, as always, listening to Kristen from krisdoesbeauty, also known as Bonnie the Lovely. And before we jump into the movie review aspect, just know that with this look, I was using First Day Just Clean Hair, and I'm going to be blow drying it for this look. And if you need a more detailed tutorial, I will probably come out with one soon. And now for this week's movie, the review will be on A Nightmare on Elm Street. Premiering in November 9th, 1984, Wes Craven made his mark in the horror/slasher genre. The budget was $1.8 million, and the box office brought in at $25.5 million. One of my favorite horror movie themes, as well as score. This just music in the opener and all throughout the movie is just beyond phenomenal. The film is considered one of the greatest horror films ever made and created a huge franchise following it, starring Freddy. It is also credited with using many of the tropes found in the low-budget horror films of the 70s and 80s that originated in John Carpenter's Halloween and led to this subgenre that we refer to now today as slasher. The film includes a morality play where sexual teens are the first ones to be killed. Film historians state that the premise is the struggle to define the distinction between dreams versus reality. So the plot starts out, you have high schooler Tina Gray, and she is awakened by a nightmare where she's attacked by a disfigured man who has burn marks all over him and has blades fixed on his hands, kind of like claws or fingernails. The following morning, she goes to school and tells her friend Nancy all about it. Nancy and Glenn both decide to stay at her house that night as a sleepover just to keep Tina from having these nightmares. Meanwhile, her boyfriend Rod shows up and they kind of get back together, go into her mother's room, and while she is sleeping, after they've hooked up, she starts having the nightmare again with this unfaced creature at that point. And then you start to see her get attacked and scratch marks, and then she eventually dies with Rob in the room. Meanwhile, they all think that he has committed the murder, or at least the police do, aka Nancy's father, who is a cop, and he flees from the scene. The next day, Rod is eventually found and arrested by Nancy's father, and then that day at school, Nancy falls asleep in class and dreams about the man who calls himself Freddy Krueger. It's only then as she is leaving that dream and waking up from the dream that she sees that she has a burn mark from being in the boiler area with him, like in her nightmare. Then at home, Nancy falls asleep in the bathtub and is nearly drowned by Krueger with the awesome scene of his kind of claw hand coming up at her in the bathtub. Nancy then goes to Rod at the police station, and he tells her all about what happened to Tina, and this makes Nancy believe that Krueger is responsible for Tina's death. She then invites her boyfriend, Glenn, over to watch her as she falls asleep, hoping that she can at least try and get him to wake her up or something like that. She then, in her dream, sees Krueger prepare to kill Rod in his cell, and she then wakes herself up, and they both run to the police station to go try and warn Rob about what's happening, but they wind up showing up right at the time that there's been a sheet tied around Rod's neck, kind of like a noose, to make it look like he hung himself, even though he was asleep at the time. Therefore, it was all kind of from the dream. Her mother then, at that point, decides to take her to a sleep disorder clinic where, in fact, during the study that they put her under, Nancy is asleep, and in the dream, she grabs Freddy Krueger's fedora and pulls it out of her dream and into reality. After all of that, her mother then you slightly see that she's beginning to drink and smoke pretty heavily, and eventually she bars the windows at the home. She then reveals to Nancy that Krueger was a child murderer within their neighborhood, and that he was just going one by one killing off everyone's children. And so the parents found out who it was, turned him into the police. They didn't do anything really about it or gave him a very light sentence. And so the parents decided to take justice in their own hands and decided to kill him by burning him. After hearing all of that, Nancy realizes that Kruger is now a vengeful ghost who is just seeking revenge on these children who are now grown up, teenagers now. She tries to call Glenn, who happens to be across the street, to warn him, but his father prevents her from speaking to him. He's kind of sick of her and her charades, as he puts it, and then Glenn eventually dies because of that. And then, with that all going on, Nancy then goes back to sleep. She asks her dad to wake her up in 20 minutes, and she goes back in trying to get Freddie into the real world. And you do think at the end of it that it has happened. However, at the very, very end, there's always that shocker scene of the whole Nancy's going off to school. You think it's a dream, but then meanwhile, Freddie's coming after and killing her mother. And so with that is my movie review of the original Nightmare on Elm Street. And I hope you like it. Please like and subscribe. And then I will see you all next week. Have a very spooky Saturday.